Okay, well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm sure I'll expect a few others to trickle in, but welcome. My name is Rebecca Shelton. I am the Director of Policy and Organizing for Appalachian Citizens Law Center. We're based in Whitesburg, Kentucky, and we're so glad to have all of you join us today for a webinar to discuss reclamation issues associated with what we are calling modern era mine lands. And what this really just means is that they are post 1977 mine lands, or you might hear post SMACRA mine lands, as in mined after the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act was passed. And this naming is really meant to just distinguish them from pre-1977 abandoned mine lands. So we are really pleased to have such a wonderful lineup of folks join us today to talk about these reclamation problems and needs. We're going to introduce the issue from a national perspective, hear from those who are affected by these issues on the ground, and then discuss the regulatory and policy issues we see as contributing to the problems we're facing. I'll introduce each speaker as we go, and then at the end, we'll have time for questions. But you can feel free throughout the webinar to drop questions into the chat or to drop them into the Q&A function on Zoom. So the first speaker we have is Peter Morgan. He is a senior attorney for the Sierra Club Environmental Law Program, and he's going to provide us with a national landscape overview of the reclamation and financial issues in the coal industry. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Peter.
Great, thanks very much, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, as Rebecca said, I'm sort of going to set the stage by giving a national overview. So the most salient fact to set the stage is to look at the ongoing significant decline of the coal industry, which is illustrated here by a graph showing the significant drop in national coal production. So production in 2020 was less than half of production in 2008. And we're actually experiencing an even greater decrease in the number of employed coal miners over that time period. We're seeing these declines in all coal producing regions across the country. And the effect of this drop in coal production has been that we're seeing increasing numbers of mine operator bankruptcies. And the bankruptcies that we're seeing are increasingly leading to mine abandonments. And can I have the next slide, please? You know, we are fully expecting that this decline is going to increase. So the graph on the previous slide, you know, showed total coal production, as I said, across all coal regions. It also includes both thermal coal and metallurgical coal. So thermal coal is coal that's burned to generate heat, which is typically used to produce electricity in power plants. Metallurgical coal is used in steelmaking. We are seeing a decline in both forms of coal mining, although it is certainly steeper in thermal coal. And we are expecting that decrease in demand to persist into the future. So the coal plants with announced closure dates prior to 2030, so in other words, coal plants closing in the next 8 years, received 27% of coal production in 2021. And that figure goes up to 37% when looking at plants with plans to shut down before 2042. So those market conditions are going to continue to put a lot of pressure on the mining industry. Metallurgical coal, those markets are global. They're subject to pretty wild swings as supply and demand vacillate, and are also subject to export constraints. And so it's difficult, I think, for mine operators to project what the demand for met coal is going to be in the future. And so as thermal coal demand goes down, that's affecting all parts of the industry. We are seeing a temporary increase in coal prices right now due to the war in Ukraine. But what's interesting is as those prices have gone up, we have not seen coal production increasing to match those prices. And there could be a number of different reasons for that, but it's likely that mine operators and investors are not confident that the price bubble is going to last long enough for them to recoup the significant startup costs it would take to reopen closed coal mines, get them back up on their feet. Next slide, please. So this slide is showing what it's looking like on the ground as the demand for coal has gone down. So what we're seeing is that lots of mines are being shuttered, many of those without being reclaimed. And sometimes those closures or idlings are happening within bankruptcies, but most of them that we're seeing are happening outside of bankruptcy. And so companies are basically removing all equipment from these sites and leaving them idle. And some of those companies have no mines that are producing any more coal. So, those companies are functionally insolvent. They haven't filed for bankruptcy in many cases because they don't have significant debt payments due, so nothing's pushing them into bankruptcy. But the result on the ground is that these mines where the equipment's been removed, all the workers have been laid off, these are what we call functionally abandoned mines or zombie mines. So in the chart here, the blue line shows the number of producing coal mines as they've gone down in number. And the orange line shows the percentage of the remaining mines that did not produce any coal in the previous year. And you can see that that percentage is increasing, and that captures in part the number of these idled mines that we're seeing. Next slide, please. So what this is leading to is what we're seeing is that regulators are just not prepared to deal with this situation. So SMACRA was supposed to avoid this sort of scenario. Congress passed SMACRA in 1977 to address the problem of abandoned unreclaimed mines. And at the heart of SMACRA, there are two requirements. One, that mine operators reclaim mines as they go, and two, that mine operators post a bond sufficient to cover the costs of completing reclamation, even if they go under. In practice, regulators have failed to enforce the reclamation requirements, allowing significant disturbed acreage to persist. And regulators have failed to require adequate bonding. This is a problem because when bonds are adequate, regulators have a free hand to enforce the law because no matter what, there will be adequate funds to complete the work, whether that's done by the company or by the regulator itself in the case of abandonment. But when bonding is inadequate, as it is now, it creates an environment where regulators become hesitant to enforce the law out of fear of pushing a company into bankruptcy. And those problems are magnified when it's the entire industry facing this financial difficulty because the pressure on the regulators is greater. And a lot of the bonding tools like pool bonds are at risk, or even the surety bond providers themselves may be pushed into bankruptcy if they have to pay out bonds for even a single large company. So this means that regulators are allowing mine sites to acquire dangerous conditions where drainage ditches and sediment ponds fill up, increasing the risks of landslides, boulders rolling down into communities below, really hazardous and dangerous situations that SMACRA was supposed to prevent. So with that, I'll turn it over to my co-panelists who will provide more detail, including regional perspectives.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. So our next presenter is Elaine Tanner. She is the program director of Friends for Environmental Justice and a landowner in Eastern Kentucky. She's going to tell us about some of the impacts of mining she's observed on her land and in her work. So I will turn it over to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'd like to start this out with a land acknowledgement, and that's something that is a very big part of my work. And we are on Cherokee hunting lands here. And the photograph that I selected here is my Cherokee friend that stands on the mountain and smiles over me. So we are asking permission that we can address these issues and that they will guide us in the right direction. Next, please. This is a view of the mountain range from the east side of the property, and I'm sorry, west side of the property. And what you see looks pretty. You can kind of see a high wall way back there in the middle. That shiny bright tree, these are autumn olives. We have a lot of invasive plants that are causing a problem in our community. Next, please. This is my partner, Jimmy Hall, and this was taken back in 2019 when we finally located here on the property. This property has been in his family since the 1800s. It was mined in 1930, and then it was remined again in 2000, which unfortunately does not allow us to be qualified for any abandoned mine lands. The property is today under some reclamation bonds, and I'll get into that a little bit in some of the next slides. Next, please. I'm going to show you where I live. I live in a holler. This is what it looked like back in 2002 when we first came. You can see a high wall that was pushed to create that high wall for ventilation in a backside mine. They pushed everything over the hillside. So as they pushed that over the hillside, it created slides, and there was to be drainage in there. But however, the regulators failed to regulate in that situation. Next, please. This is what we live with today. And the valley that I live below, and it's like a horseshoe, and we're down below, there's a bench area that kind of cuts through the middle of this mountain range. And over the years, these boulders keep sliding and falling down into the valley, and they jam up the natural runways. And we are seeing a lot of problems in many hollers like this. Next, please. You can see a runoff in the slide to the left. That is right behind my house, as is these boulders you will see. And, you know, I've had people say, well, how big are the boulders? I can't tell. Some of these boulders are the size of rooms in my house. Next, please. This is the mine bench that blew out back in 2021. And we reported it, and fortunately, they were right there. My house is right down the hill from this. And when the natural run jammed up, what happened is the silt and the mud went one way and the water went another, taking the path of least resistance. And it actually ends up within 15 feet of my house. And what happens in this area is due to pre-law mining. Next, please. This is another issue that we've had, and this is about 50 feet from my back door, and this runs orange in the spring. And this is a sulfur mine acid. We've tested the conductivity in our creeks, and it does affect it. Next slide, please. I'm going to take you to the left fork of Shelby Fork. As you come up our holler, this is what you will see if you would go up into the mountains. And this is another horseshoe valley, just like the one that we came from on the right side of Shelby Fork. Back in 2021, they had come in January because we still have reclamation bonds, and they wanted to do some actions on the permit. In order to do that, they had to clear up what had been sitting there for an entire year. Next, please. This is what went into our creek to make that happen. This is a blowout from a mine that fills with water. And when that blows out, we get mud, we get silt, we get water, we get coal chunks. And you'll see some, you know, good sized coal chunks. You could heat your house with many houses with the coal that goes down into this creek. And this is a natural silt pond that was designed. This is what I live with in that area. Our creeks ran for 2 weeks like milkshakes. And this is a large area. We're not talking just a little runoff. This went every direction, path of least resistance. Next, please. On the other side of where you just saw that last photo, this was an old logging pond and it filled up with silt, and you can kind of see it coming down the hillside. This silt, I stood eye to eye to take this photograph, and it was like quicksand, and it's a large area. I'm going to say maybe 1/3 of an acre. Next, please. And what we have is, trees, rock slide, anything in the path of a mudslide, and it's going to go toward the path of least resistance, as I said. And it jams up the waterways and it creates these problems. And what happens in these areas, the next slide, please. What happens in these areas is you're dealing with, in this particular photograph, this is where they nicked an old mine from the 30s, and they went in about 2002, they nicked it. I took this photograph back in 2001. They've created a wetland on this bench area. The headwater was a hollow fill, and the water seems to be taking the path of least resistance. The old mine seam filled up with water, and it's coming out wherever it can. Next, please. This is how it comes out. This is deep into those wetlands that I just showed you. I take a hike up there every spring. You cannot access this. This is no longer being tested. It is not part of the reclamation bonds. And these are portholes that are coming out of this old mine and are filling our stream. So now Mill Creek has 2 headwaters. And if you look at what we are in Letcher County, we have 3 headwaters. Everything in Letcher County runs out of our county. It goes into the Big Sandy watershed and eventually into the Ohio River Basin. And if these headwaters aren't cleaned up and we don't do something about what we're dealing with, then we will end up with more complications. The center photo shows what happened when a mine blew out, and the other photo shows how the mitigation is today, and that was done back in 2014. And basically what we need is we need to continue funds. We need funds to address these issues, and we need our regulators to not turn a blind eye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine, for sharing all of that about your home. Our next speaker is Ellen Feister. She's a member of the Northern Plains Resource Council and the Bull Mountain Alliance. She lives in Montana in the Bull Mountains and was a former rancher there. Her ranch was located near Signal Peak Energy, which is Montana's only underground longwall coal mine. And she's going to speak to us today about the issues the region is facing due to inadequate reclamation and a lack of water replacement. To help share, Elaine gives us a little bit of an Eastern perspective, and Ellen will share some of the Western perspective on this issue.
Thank you. Signal Peak Mine is a combination of Russian oligarch money and some Ohio people who have a lot of coal money and First Energy of Ohio. They put that money in. They thought they were going to get a big easy go, but after they put up the money to build the mine, the prices collapsed, but they built the mine. Some of us are wondering how the mine is even holding together because we can't find markets. We can't figure out who's buying the coal. It has had a very uneven performance. It's recently been fined $1 million by EPA for violations. This mine has taken up the last 33 years of my life. I don't think it's any different from other coal mines. It's hard to deal with. They're not interested in communicating with the landowner. The regulators are much more sympathetic to the mine. We've had trouble with subsidence. It was predicted it wouldn't be a problem. We've had huge cracks on the surface. And the worst thing for Signal Peak, from their point of view, is that we got to one of them before they did, and we got a lot of pictures. the next one, we didn't find out about it until after they'd moved in. And they kept me off a ranch road for over 3 months while they fixed it, quote unquote. I think that Montana DEQ is doing road inspections on mine damage. Last summer, they quit going out entirely because they were so scared of fire. But the mine didn't quit going out. They could have done walk-in inspections, which would have been no fire danger, but they didn't. Montana is fortunate that we do not have self-bonding in Montana. They've had to all post bonds. Our experience has been that they always want to lowball the bonds, particularly in water replacement costs. I have had one spring quite damaged. I don't know if it will ever recover. Another one that was a permanent spring and watered about a section down the drainage. They undermined that and there is no more water there. So the whole drainage is dried up. They've hauled water to that tank for this livestock, but all of the natural water that was available when our livestock weren't in there is now gone. I don't know what they're going to do for replacement. So far, they're just talking. They've dried up my neighbor's well, and that's been ongoing for 3 years. It didn't meet the predictions that the experts made, but it did happen. So I have questions about how they model for these things with the permits. I filed a citizen's complaint on a nitrogen scar where they pumped a lot of nitrogen into the mine when it cracked open clear down to the bottom. And that was 10 years ago. It's still unreclaimed completely. And the road is not even mentioned for reclamation. And that was put in at midnight by a guy on a cat. So you can imagine how well it comports with the topography. The other thing that this slow reclamation does is it enhances erosion. And in the permits, they all promise that they will attempt to minimize erosion. And when they don't do reclamation, the erosion continues unabated. So the companies have co-opted MDEQ pretty much in this state. And I don't know exactly what you do to regulators to give them a better spine. And that's what I've learned in 33 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your story. So the next person we'll have share with us about their work is Lindsay Terrace. She's the engagement coordinator for the Alliance for Appalachia. And she's going to tell us about some of the work that her organization has been involved with concerning resident watchdogging, and also to learn about the resources that her team is creating for anyone concerned about these issues. Lindsay?
Yeah, hi everyone. So the Alliance for Appalachia is a member-led coalition of 15 organizations across 6 states. One of the regional teams that we coordinate is our grassroots water testing and enforcement team, where our members share strategies between states on things like community engagement in bond release proceedings, tracking and challenging coal mine permits, submitting citizen complaints, and using the Clean Water and Safe Drinking Water Acts to enforce the law. We also coordinate a federal strategy team. 4 or 5 years ago, our teams published a report and fact sheets on bonding programs in the 4 Central Appalachian states of Kentucky, Virginia, West Virginia, and Tennessee to help us understand the similarities and differences across programs. And then building on that, between August 2020 and February 2021, we conducted a listening project across the region with folks like Elaine that you just heard from, around the mounting number of unreclaimed coal mines across the region and the increasingly clear probability that many of these mines will become abandoned in coming years as the coal industry continues to collapse. So with this project, we wanted to both educate and learn from the people we interviewed, and to get ideas for strategies, tactics, and solutions to problems associated with modern era coal mining. There were several takeaways from the listening project, including that substantial and sustained federal investment in reclamation is necessary to address this problem. People said that mining companies that fail to reclaim permits should be held accountable through all available regulatory, administrative, and legal avenues, that it should not be the community's burden to bear. And then another point of unity was around the need for an extensive public education effort around these issues. So what you see on your screen is kind of a summary of the points of unity, and we'll share a link to this listening project report back as well, so you can see all that's there. But kind of the main thing we heard was that there really needs to be an extensive public education effort around these issues. So for the past 6 months or so, members of our Alliance for Appalachia grassroots enforcement team have been leaning back on this listening project to tell the story of the collapse of the coal industry, bonding programs, and why modern coal mine cleanup is necessary to achieve environmental justice. We created the webpage that you see on your screen now, and you'll see that it compiles loads of resources from this community and our partners in this work, including lots of people and organizations that are here on the webinar. It includes personal stories. You can see videos. It includes an explanation of the difference between abandoned versus modern era mines and case studies from across the region. It includes links to reports, articles, and other research, and we'll be adding more educational and lobbying materials as well. So I hope you'll spend some time exploring this and help us get the word out about it, including sharing it with your congressional representatives and staff members as well. We need them to know about these issues so that they can advocate for federal solutions from within Congress. And, you know, the coal industry hopes that all of this is too convoluted and too complicated for us to get involved with, but we're really committed to learning from and lifting up grassroots leadership for the solutions that we need. So I'll wrap up here with an invitation to join us. We really hope the work of this team leads to our communities having improved water quality and clean drinking water. And in relation to modern mining and what we're discussing today, that means ensuring that modern mines get properly reclaimed. So if any of this sounds like something that overlaps with skills that you have to share or things that you'd like to learn more about, we'd love to have you join our team. So please get in touch with me. I'll put my name or my email and phone number in the chat, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lindsay. So now, we've heard about how these issues are affecting residents and what folks and organizations and individuals are doing to try and learn about and address these issues and communicate them from where they stand. And so our next two speakers are going to talk about this reclamation crisis now from a regulatory and financial perspective. Those facets of the problem are both somewhat distinct, but also deeply intertwined. And I will let Shannon and Aaron tell you more. So first we'll hear from Shannon Anderson. She's a staff attorney and organizer for the Powder River Basin Resource Council based in Wyoming. And Shannon will talk a little bit more about these issues from a Western US perspective and also speak about the regulatory problems that are contributing to reclamation issues on these mine sites. So Shannon, turn it over to you.
Yeah, and thanks so much, Rebecca, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. It's really my pleasure to work with such a diverse group of experts, both citizen experts and paid staff at organizations. We've really, I think, built a good coalition across the U.S. coalfields to bring these recommendations to you today. This is based on our experience from our work throughout the US, and I'm here speaking to you from my hometown of Sheridan, which is on the western edge of the Powder River Basin. And as most folks know, the Powder River Basin is the nation's largest coal field. We produce roughly 40% of the nation's coal from about a dozen very large strip mines. And so we have, a history of experience with dealing with how reclamation really plays out at a very large scale in grassland ecosystems here in Wyoming. Go ahead and flip it to the next slide. So the problem is folks were really laying out is today's regulatory framework under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act was designed around creating good conditions in new mine permits. So it was based on the assumption that new mines would be coming in. There would be kind of a regulatory process to develop a strong mine plan, a strong reclamation plan, and that permit, would have the conditions necessary to regulate that coal mine through its entire life. Unfortunately, that's just not what we're seeing on the ground. And of course, we're not seeing new mine permits at all in most of our coalfield regions. So where we are today is really looking at the need to have better enforcement and regulatory requirements at key points in a mine's life cycle, like modifications and renewals, but also just the day-to-day work at the mine and what that looks like for reclamation, for problems for neighboring landowners, landowners that live on a mine site, as Elaine and Ellen were describing to you. And so really the need to kind of think of a new regulatory framework that matches the reality that we're seeing in coalfield communities. I like this quote from James Castee, who actually works for the Wyoming Attorney General's office. It was related to a proposal for, some might remember Peabody and Arch were thinking of merging a few years ago, and that got beat back in antitrust kind of law. But the quote, I think, is still really appropriate, that there's two ways that this can play out: either thoughtful way that minimizes harm, or really haphazardly, which is what we've been seeing up to this point. Sudden mine closures, bankruptcies, as Peter was explaining, just idle mines for years or even decades. And so again, we really need to kind of think about what is the new regulatory framework for this moment that we find ourselves in the coal industry. Go ahead and flip to the next slide. So I have 3 recommendations to talk to you about today. And again, these are recommendations that come not from me, but from a coalition of groups and citizens that have been working on kind of thinking how we can create this new regulatory system together. So the first recommendation is grounded in kind of what you were hearing from Elaine and Ellen, that there just isn't a lot of oversight from the regulators about reclamation work on the day-to-day basis at a mine site. So really thinking about, again, the key opportunities of permit transfer. So this is when a new coal mine operator kind of comes in, either because the mine's been bought in or outside bankruptcy. A lot of the times, actually, mines right now are not even bought. They're actually, a former owner is paying a new owner to come and take over a mine site because of the ongoing liability. So permit transfer is a key piece of the permit life cycle. Renewals happen every 5 years. Under SMACRA, there's actually a right to renew a coal mine permit. And so we want to kind of gut check that a little bit with some additional things that OSMRE and state regulators can do. And then modification is also a big piece at a time. So thinking about if a coal mine decreases production or changes its reclamation plan, having better oversight from regulators to make sure that the reclamation bonds are adequate and the reclamation plans can have success on the ground. Okay, go ahead and send it to the next slide. So the second recommendation kind of builds on that and really thinking about permit renewal stages, and specifically looking at making sure that we kind of do an economic check of where the mine is. So not just looking at thinking about the life cycle of the mine based on what the company is saying to the regulators, and basing a mine and reclamation plan based on that, but really thinking about the economics of that mine, and having updated reclamation cost estimates reflecting those current site conditions. Okay, go ahead and flip it to the next slide. And then the final recommendation is really based on the need for greater public participation. And so making sure that there's a series of things that are just defaulted to be significant permit revisions. And that is important because a significant permit revision allows for the utmost of public participation under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. And so we've recommended things like a mine closure or a shutdown. So where a company says, next year we plan to close a mine or ramp down production, that should be a significant permit revision. Anything related to, change in permit status. So going into a temporary cessation plan or delaying reclamation at a mine site should be a significant permit revision. Amending the reclamation plan itself, and then anything related to bonding, and specifically bond forfeiture proceedings. The picture on this slide is the Kayenta Mine, which is on the Navajo Nation, and it's regulated by OSM directly because it is on tribal land. And there's a permit revision going on for the Kayenta Mine that actually it has not been deemed to be significant, even though it's very significant to the people that live near this mine. And we've been putting pressure on OSMRE to really kind of think again about what is a significant permit revision and how that process works for people on the ground. Okay. And that's what I've got. And thank you so much again for listening, and hope to answer more questions as we go forward today.
Thank you so much, Shannon. So now I'm going to turn it over to Erin Savage. She's Senior Program Manager at Appalachian Voices. Erin previously authored a report on the status of coal mine bonding across several eastern states, and today she's going to talk a little bit about how bonding issues are manifesting in harmful ways in West Virginia and Kentucky, as well as share a bit more about how she's been thinking about bonding issues from an industry-wide perspective. So Erin?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I just wanted to add a little bit more information building upon the report that Appalachian Voices did last year. I think many of you may have joined us for some webinars on that. And specifically last year, we were looking into the total amount of reclamation needed in the eastern states at these modern era mines. And so when we did that research, we determined there were roughly 633,000 acres left to be reclaimed at current coal mines. So those are mines that are still held by coal companies. We had included some information on the western states from a report done a couple of years ago by Western Organization of Resource Councils, and I was able to update those estimates based on Office of Surface Mining numbers just recently, and total's gone up a bit. There's about 323,000 acres in the western states to reclaim, so that we're nearing almost 1 million acres to be reclaimed at coal mines across the country. And we're honestly probably over that because these numbers don't currently reflect mines in the Illinois basin. We weren't able to get that data, but there is significant reclamation that needs to be done in both Illinois and Indiana as well. We've got an unknown total cost for the entire country, but the analysis that I did last year for just the eastern states, I estimated based on research out of Marshall University that the total cost is between $7 and $9 billion to complete the reclamation in the eastern states. All right, next slide. The other thing we did was look at how much money is available through reclamation bonding. So in this figure, you'll see that blue is the representation of the cost that I estimated based on a total acreage in each of the eastern states. And the red circles are total available bonds. So you'll see no state has bonds that are nearly significant enough to cover the total cost of reclamation. All right, next slide. And this looks into a little more detail of what bonding looks like in each of these states. I think the main takeaway here is that the green bars that you see, those are the majority of the bonds in each state, and those are the permit specific bonds, meaning each mine secures a bond that covers only that mine. And most often, those permit specific bonds are provided by surety companies, which are essentially insurance companies. There's a few other types of bonding we still have on the East Coast. We have some self bonds in Virginia. That's the only state in the East Coast that has self bonding, and that's basically a theoretical too big to fail model. It's very insecure. There's no actual money behind a coal company's word that it would provide the money. So the bonding report that Lindsay talked about, done through the Alliance for Appalachia. Appalachian Voices worked on that with the Alliance as well. And back then, about 4 or 5 years ago, we really looked into the details of these alternative bonding systems like the self bonds and really highlighted the problems with them. Also regarding pool bonds, which are still common in the eastern states. And that's essentially where the state puts together a pool of money that coal companies pay into that would cover some reclamation in the event of abandonment. But you can see it's the yellow bars there. The pools are not very large, and in most cases are not big enough to withstand even the bankruptcy and mine abandonment of a single large coal company. So at that time when we wrote the bonding report, what we really suggested was that states move to these permit specific bonds only and provide bonds through a third party like a surety. At that time, that did seem like the best option. But as the industry has continued to decline and bankruptcies have started to result in bond forfeitures, the other interesting thing that we've seen is a consolidation of bonds in many cases under a few different sureties rather than spread across many sureties with good diversity in terms of what they're covering. So this year I've been slowly collecting additional information about which sureties provide bonds in various coal states across the country. So I have some preliminary information that I wanted to share with you on that today. All right, so what we are basically looking into is who provides this $3.8 billion that's available through bonds in the eastern states. So, sorry, I've actually gone through a lot of this. So the coal companies typically get bonds through the sureties. They were viewed as most secure, but due to the current situation, we're beginning to question how secure surety bonds actually are. All right, next slide. So in the in the data that I've collected, but also just through news stories and things we've been well aware of, there is a particular company rising to the top of our list of concerns, and that is Indemnity National Insurance Company. A few things that I wanted to highlight regarding this company. So in West Virginia, there is a coal company called Erp Environmental. This is covered in the reclamation report from last year as well. ERP is one of those companies that essentially has not had to go bankrupt, but has just stopped doing much of anything. They originally came around because they took a bunch of coal mines out of the Patriot bankruptcy a bit over 5 years ago. And those mines were all essentially mined out and just needed reclamation. So they weren't worth much of anything. And since that time, ERP has made very little reclamation progress at those mines. And subsequently, the West Virginia DEP chose to place ERP under what's known as a receivership, where they put the company in control of essentially a consultant. And part of the reason they did that is they found that Indemnity covers $65 million worth of ERP's bonds. So if ERP abandons all its mines, Indemnity is on the hook for $65 million worth of reclamation. And the total cost of reclamation at those mines is considerably higher than that $65 million. Similarly with Black Jewel in Kentucky, Black Jewel has gone through a very long bankruptcy and has considerable number of permits in Kentucky that are essentially going to be abandoned. And in that case, Indemnity covers $89 million in bonds for the Black Jewel and Revelation permits just in Kentucky. And then the third piece of information that's a newer piece was that we looked into the bonds in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is often held up as a state that has done a good job with its bonding. Its estimates are better than other states, and they typically only use full cost bonding. But between the data that I requested last year and the data I requested this spring, we've found that the total number or the total amount of bonds covered by Indemnity in Pennsylvania has risen in just 1 year from 181 million to 342 million. So if you add that up, you're looking at over 500 million covered by just one surety in just 3 coal mining states. So that is the end of what I have to share today, but we are continuing to work on getting a better picture of the surety situation in other states as well. And we're hoping to have more information released soon.
Great. Thank you very much, Erin. So that ends our speakers today, our panel today, and we will reserve a little bit of time to answer questions. But just before we do that, I want to invite all of you who are on this webinar today to help us take action to address these issues. At the beginning of 2021, just after the Biden administration commenced, we, many of us on this panel today, as well as other organizations, developed a briefing paper for the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation and Enforcement, detailing many of our concerns and solutions through which to begin addressing those concerns. And some of those, we had a detailed list of priorities that we hope to make progress on during this new administration. Some of the priorities were sort of bundled together in Shannon's presentation. She touched on some of the recommendations that we put together in this briefing paper. Unfortunately, we've made little, if any, progress during our meetings with OSMRE under the new administration. And one of the reasons we think this may be is because there is not yet a director for the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation and Enforcement. So though we're nearly a year and a half into the Biden administration, the White House still hasn't even nominated an individual to be the director of this critical agency. So we'd ask all of you to take action now to urge the White House to fill this important role. I'm going to drop a link into the chat where you can click through and sign a petition that we will deliver to White House officials urging the expedient nomination of this director. And I also just want to note that, this issue is not going to be fully resolved through regulatory efforts alone. For some communities, it's already too late. Mines have already been forfeited or released from bonds. And so we are also working to draft potential legislation that would make funds available to help shore up reclamation on mine sites that have been abandoned by the industry and left for state regulators to clean up, often without adequate amounts of funding. And so we do hope to share more information soon regarding that legislation. And with that, I will open it up for questions. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat or the Q&A function in the webinar, and we'll give folks just a minute or so to think any of those through. And in the meantime, do any of the panelists have any other comments or wrap up? Things they want to say to wrap up anything else while we're waiting for folks to weigh in. If not, that's okay too. We can all just kind of patiently wait and see what pops up. Okay, so we do have one question here. So looks like it's for you, Aaron. What is the estimate of the cost of reclamation in Kentucky for Black Jewel's remaining bonds above the indemnity coverage? When you say remaining bonds, I'm assuming these are abandoned or revoked permits that have not been forfeited or transferred to another permittee. Can Black Jewel still require indemnity to cover bonding costs, even though the bankruptcy settlement is complete? So it was directed at Aaron, but I think there's also other folks on this call who can help contribute and respond to that question as well. Does anybody want to take a first attempt? It was the multi-part question.
Yeah, I can start and just say that I don't have current numbers right now on indemnity. Like, what we need to look at is which permits have transferred as of late, which of those have not, are covered by indemnity. And then beyond that, in terms of the actual cost of reclamation, we have some information from statements made by the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet regarding like the overall shortfall, but we don't necessarily have good documentation of actual reclamation costs at each of the mines individually. So long answer, short answer is I don't know.
And the one thing I would add to that is that, in many cases where we have access to estimated reclamation costs, that's based on the reclamation plan when the mine was operating. And what we've seen with the Black Jewel permits, and is consistent with other abandoned or idled or these functionally abandoned permits, is that the longer they remain without reclamation work happening, the more those costs increase, because you now have significant erosion issues and other things like that that have to be dealt with beyond what was in the original reclamation plan. So those costs are likely to be even higher than what any original estimates might have been.
Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify too, I think with regard to the last question you put here, can Black Jewel still require indemnity to cover bonding costs, even though the bankruptcy settlement is complete? The responsibility then goes for the state regulators are also in that contract with the surety company. It's sort of a three-party contract between the coal mining company, the state regulators, and the surety. So whatever the sureties were on the hook for is now being negotiated, directly with the state regulators. So I hope that helps answer that question. Looks like we have a couple of other questions. The next question I saw that popped up in the chat was from Patty. I've seen ads showing coal companies proposing to use reclaimed mine lands for solar installations. Do you see any of that happening? Does anybody want to take that? I can respond to that one too.
Yeah, I would just note, I did put a link to an article about a recent announcement from Peabody in the Illinois Basin. It's a very significant amount of solar that they're proposing to kind of get built in the Illinois Basin. I think there's, differences in, say, Peabody mines in Wyoming and elsewhere in the West because of federal kind of nexus, either federal mineral ownership or surface, and a variety of kind of other issues with our electricity markets. But it's an interesting proposal. We'll see how it goes. It's sort of the first acknowledgement from a coal company that they need to be something besides a coal company to be able to move forward in our new energy future.
Yeah, and I'll also add that there is a proposed installation in Kentucky, in Martin County, on a reclaimed mine site. It's still in process. The actual construction hasn't started yet, but all of the regulatory hoops have been passed and jumped through, and I think they're expecting to start construction on that mine site. But it's not a one size fits all kind of solution or reuse of those sites. There are a couple of, it actually can be, at least in our area, more costly to put solar on a mine site rather than, one that has not been mined, because you're essentially hitting rock very quickly rather than being able to kind of drive pylons down into soil. And there's also just, kind of, at this particular site, my understanding in the Martin County site is what makes it highly competitive to put solar there is because there is a large existing substation on that mine site as well that allows the electricity to connect right back into the grid. So I think in all of this, with the solar development and solar industry, you're going to have to be thinking about, well, it could happen, sure, but is it sort of competitively the best site and for those solar installations going forward? And I think that varies probably a lot according to the region. So I'm skimming through the chat. Mike, I see that you've requested the briefing paper. I can make sure to get that to you. Any other questions that folks have? See, a few others have been, Mary has also dropped some information, Mary Crummer, into the chat about responding to the Black Jewel question. And also there are a few others adding some insight about other solar projects. Right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, great, thank you, Shannon. We are right at the hour, so I do want to, oh, there's one last question. Maybe we'll take this one and then we'll wrap it up. So the question is anyone addressing this issue at the state level? So I don't know if folks want to talk a little bit about some of the state legislation that's passed this past spring.
Yeah, I could start off just briefly. So Wyoming did just pass an assigned trust bill, which is kind of an interesting bonding option where companies are going to be able to effectively put up cash that's held by the state that would be available for reclamation work. It kind of bankruptcy proofs reclamation funding in a new and unique way. We'll see if operators actually take advantage of this option, but it's a new thing in Wyoming. And we've also worked with the state to reform our self-bonding rules. And so we kind of took off where OSMRE in the Obama years left off to reform self-bonding in Wyoming. And with that, there's actually no self-bonding at any coal mines in Wyoming anymore. We were about $2 billion self-bonded at the start of the bankruptcies in 2015, and now there's no self-bonding left in Wyoming. So that's there are some abilities to do reform at the state level, even in states like Wyoming, which of course have a significant economic incentive to keep the coal industry going and vibrant. So really, I think there are some options, but what we really do need is a lot of kind of guidance from OSMRE, leadership from the federal government, Department of the Interior, to really help state regulators be better. Because of course the goal of federal regulation and policy is to create a floor that doesn't allow a captured regulator who has an interest in maintaining the coal industry in their state to be worse than that federal floor. So we really do need kind of a federal response as well.
Yeah, and I would just add that the eastern states have essentially all gotten rid of their self-bonding, with the exception of Virginia, which has gotten rid of self-bonding, but was unable to retroactively get bonds replaced for A&G Coal Company that's owned by Governor Justice's family. So those are still outstanding. The states have also, in some cases, increased their pool bonds, although not a whole lot. And so I see a lot of the actions the eastern states have taken lately as being, I don't know, kind of putting a Band-Aid on the situation, because now we're seeing, as this example in Pennsylvania is happening elsewhere, where they're allowing coal companies to cover bonds with the sureties that are way overextended, and we have not seen state agencies acknowledge that as a problem at all.
Great. Well, with that, I will go ahead and close this out. Again, thank you everyone for spending the hour with us, and for all of the panelists for sharing your insight and your stories. And I think there may still be a few pending questions in the chat. Folks asking for resources, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to drop my email in the chat right now. And others on the panel might do that as well. But feel free to reach out, and we'll try to connect you with the resources that you are interested in, or the people that you'd like to talk to. The more folks we have involved, the better. So thank you so much, and everyone have a great rest of your afternoon.